but it also means that's $50 billion they can't use for a government budget, for social services, for infrastructure, for investment. It's a serious dent in a Russian economy, which already was stagnating with almost no growth in GDP since the end of last year. I hasten to add, what we're not talking about here is the economic collapse of Russia. That is always something that the Kremlin people come at us and say, oh, you've always said Russia will collapse economically. And look, here we are more than 4 years into the invasion. It hasn't happened. We're not talking about collapse. We're talking about the limits on what Russia can do. And the more that you hit Russia's revenues, the more you will constrain what it can do in terms of the invasion. The question, that open question, having worked through all of that is this going to be a loss that Russia sustains each and every week? Can they recover, rebuild the ports and the oil terminals? Can they provide adequate air defenses? Or are we now in a position where week in, week out, Ukraine will hit them again and again, forcing them to suspend operations and take serious economic damage?
Putin's largest Black Sea oil terminal obliterated overnight. Russia is losing its oil export capacity. Vladimir Putin can't stop this. Satellite photos show heavy damage at Russia's Primorsk oil terminal, one of the country's most important export points on the Baltic Sea. According to Reuters, 40% of the terminal's oil storage capacity has been destroyed after attacks. At least 8 large storage tanks were hit. Each tank used to hold huge amount of crude oil, so losing them makes it much harder for the terminal to operate. Primorsk is a key hub for Russian oil exports, usually handling close to 1 million barrels of oil per day. Even if pipelines bringing oil to the port are still working, the loss of storage creates serious problems. Oil needs to be stored, balanced and prepared before being loaded onto ships. With much less storage available, the whole process slows down. As a result, shipments have dropped, fewer tankers are arriving, and some export operations have stopped for periods of time. The damage is not an isolated event for Russia. It is part of a wider pattern of attacks on Russian energy sites. Other nearby ports on the Baltic Sea have also been targeted by Ukrainian drones, leading to more disruptions. Experts say this strategy is deliberate. Instead of trying to destroy long pipelines, which are harder to fully disable, the attacks focus on storage tanks and terminals. These are easier to hit, highly visible, and take a long time to repair. This kind of damage causes wider problems beyond the immediate destruction. With less storage, Russia cannot move oil so smoothly through its system. Delays increase, flexibility decreases, and it becomes harder to manage this. Trying to move oil through other ports is possible, but slower and more expensive. In short term, this leads to reduced exports and temporarily shutdowns. Over time, it could weaken the stability of Russia's oil supply chains. The situation also shows how the war is affecting the economy, not just the battlefield. Meanwhile, Russia's major oil export hubs on the Baltic Sea, Ust-Luga and Primorsk, are still struggling to return to normal operations after a wave of Ukrainian drone attacks, according to another reporting by Reuters. The continued disruption is forcing the country's oil producers to quickly find new ways to move their exports. These ports are critical to Russia's energy sites. In normal times, they handle large volumes of oil, loading many tankers each week for delivery. Now much of that activity has been slowed. Damage to storage tanks and infrastructure has made it difficult to store and prepare oil for shipments, while safety concerns are delaying any full restart. Even where facilities are partly intact, the risk of more strikes is creating hesitation. Companies are not able to operate full capacity, and loading schedules remain uncertain. As a result, fewer ships are being processed to deal with the disruption. Russian refiners are trying to reroute supply. Some shipments are being sent through other ports, while others are moved by rail or adjusted through different pipeline routes. These options are slower and cost more, adding extra pressure to an already strained energy system. The effects are spreading beyond the ports themselves in Russia. Delays, routing, and reduced capacity are creating a ripple effect across Russia's oil supply chain. Buyers and shipping companies are facing uncertainty as delivery times become less predictable. The situation shows how attack on key Russian infrastructure can have broader economic impact by targeting major export hubs. Ukrainian strikes are not just causing local damage, but also weakening Russia's ability to move oil. Since oil exports are a major source of income for the nation, ongoing disruptions at Ust-Luga and Primorsk could have wider financial consequences. For now, there is no clear timeline for when full operations will resume. Until repairs are completed and security risks decrease, Russia's Baltic oil exports are likely to remain under pressure. Meanwhile, Russia could soon be forced to cut its oil production as Ukraine strikes continue to disrupt key parts of its energy system, according to another report by Reuters. The attacks on ports, pipelines, and refineries have reduced the export capacity by around 1 million barrels per day, which is roughly 1/5 of its total oil export capability. The problem is not just the damage, but how it affects the entire chain of oil movement. Russia produces large amount of oil every day, but it relies on steady flows through pipelines, storage facilities, and ports to get that oil to global markets. When any part of the system is damaged, the flow slows down. Recent strikes have hit major export hubs and infrastructure, including Baltic seaports like Primorsk, terminals, Ust-Luga, as well as other facilities in the Black Sea like Novorossiysk. Damage to storage tanks, loading systems, and pipeline has created bottlenecks, meaning oil cannot be moved or shipped out as quickly as before. As a result, Russia is facing growing imbalance. It is producing more oil than it can export. When storage fills up and transport routes are limited, producers have little choice but to slow down or stop production. This is why industry sources say output cuts are now likely. The estimated loss of 1 million barrels per day is significant. It represents about 20% of Russia's export capacity and is large enough to affect both the nation's revenues and global oil supply. Even if some of the damage is repaired, repeated attacks make it difficult to fully restore operations. To manage their situation, Russian companies are trying to reroute oil through alternative ports, increase rail shipments, or adjust pipeline flows. However, these options are less efficient and cannot fully replace the lost capacity in the Baltic Sea. They also increase cost and delay, setting pressure. The impact goes beyond logistics because all exports are a major source of income for Russia, so any sustained disruption can affect government revenue. At the same time, reduced exports can influence global oil markets, potentially affecting prices depending on how long the disruption lasts. Overall, Reuters reporting suggests that the strikes are not only damaging individual facilities, but are starting to affect Russia's ability to maintain oil production and export. If export constraints continue, production cuts may become unavoidable, making a deeper economic impact from the ongoing attacks. Meanwhile, Ukraine has stepped up its attacks on the Russian Black Sea port city of Novorossiysk, hitting both energy, infrastructure, and areas near where civilians live, according to Reuters. Novorossiysk is one of Russia's most important ports. It plays a major role in shipping oil and fuel to global markets, and also has military importance, hosting parts of Russia's Black Sea naval forces. Because of this, it has become a repeated target in Ukraine's broader campaign. Recent reporting shows these attacks are not isolated. Over the past year, drones and sea-based strikes have targeted oil terminals, fuel storage, and port facilities around the city. Some attacks have sparked fires at energy sites, halted oil shipments, and reduced the port's ability to operate at full capacity. Even when the strikes are aimed at infrastructure, the effects often spread beyond these military targets. And also, Russia suffered another losses, and civilians have been injured by explosion because of Russia's work of air defense. This highlights the growing risks for Russian war machine and military sites. The attacks are part of wider strategy. Ukraine increased focus on high-value targets like ports, refineries, pipelines, aiming to disrupt Putin's war machine. These sites are critical because they connect production to global markets. When they're damaged, even temporarily, it can show slow shipments and rise costs for Russian war machine. There is no clear sign the attacks are slowing down. Instead, the pattern suggests a sustained effort to keep pressure on key Russian infrastructure. As long as that continues, Novorossiysk is likely to remain a frequent target, with ongoing risks for Putin's war machine and Russia's logistics. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and glory to Ukraine.